Welcome to episode 91 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. Today's episode is going to be talking about coronavirus and how the human brain responds to pandemics. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about a subject that is very timely right now, and hopefully it won't stay that way, because in light of the outbreak of coronavirus, I will be talking about pandemics and how that all impacts the human brain. Throughout the episode, I will reference various articles and links to past episodes, all of which can be found within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/91. If you're already on the Brainy Business list, you got a direct link from me within the email you received on Friday when this episode came out, as well as a link to other recent content and a link to the page on the website with all the freebie worksheets. If you're not yet on the list and would like to be, simply sign up for any freebie from the Brainy Business and you'll be automatically added. Everyone living here in the United States can sign up easily by texting the word Brainy, Brainy, to 33777. All right, let's get straight to the main content of the episode. I'm not going to get too much into what coronavirus is specifically, but there are links within the show notes of the episode to the CDC's website with information about the novel coronavirus, also known as COVID-19. There's also a really thorough and well put together article from the New York Times, a YouTube video from someone who was on a cruise ship in Tokyo, an American woman who tested positive for the virus and was hospitalized even though she basically had no symptoms and her husband was still in quarantine on the cruise ship at that point. It's important to note that the information about coronavirus specifically is changing rapidly. What I put in my notes and record today will not be accurate by the time this even goes live on March 13th. There are new cases every day and lots of changes as the CDC and World Health Organizations and governments and private citizens around the world are doing what they can to contain the virus and its spread. I've been reading up on this quite a lot recently in preparation for this episode and some possible articles, and because it's a big deal. In case you don't know, I live in Washington State, the first in the U.S. to declare a state of emergency. The highest number of cases of coronavirus in the U.S. have been here, and the first death in the country was also in Washington. At the time of recording this, California is the only other state to have declared a state of emergency. A name that I will say doesn't help contain public fear in a case like this. I understand why it's called that and why it's important to declare it, but talk about a framing issue. It might as well be called everyone panic status or get ready to freak out. When hearing that Washington State declared a state of emergency, Americans and anyone have a difficult time taking that lightly. The brain hears it and starts to wonder what that means. What must be happening there? Why do they need that? Are we next? Should we be in an emergency? Is my state's government doing the right things? Am I in danger? And on and on and on. The human brain has a lot of capacity to process information, and when given something new and unknown like this, it will run rampant a bit. We can't help it. Even when you hear the facts and figures and information comes to light, your brain will still overanalyze, and for the lack of a better term, it's going to freak out a little bit. Remember back to episode 89 on the focusing illusion. I talked about how focusing on something makes it feel more important or significant. When you focus on it, you start to think about all the worst case scenarios and questions. Your counterfactual and prefactual thinking begin to ramp up into overdrive as well. And because there isn't much known information and you don't actually have control over an outcome in many ways, you can't use your next time I'll language because you didn't do anything wrong or right, presumably. You're just here, waiting with everyone else. A lack of control is a breeding ground for fear and a brain bonanza. Another thing that can cause a brain to get really scared and start to look at worst case scenarios is when something is new. There's no rule for that. The subconscious is looking for things to relate back to. And so using the concept of relativity, we need things to be able to categorize what we're facing here, what's in front of us. We would ask, is this like the flu? Is it like SARS? How is it like the measles or something else? And unfortunately, when it's unlike anything we've dealt with personally and people start using the term pandemic or epidemic or outbreak, we recall all the worst case scenarios in our brain that are associated with those words. Maybe the movie Outbreak that came out in the late 90s, I think, or zombie apocalypse movies or the Black Plague. This is likely and very hopefully not like any of those instances. And on a conscious level, you know that, but you can't stop your brain from going there and fearing those worst case, and honestly, thankfully, never really happened ever case scenarios. One of the biggest concepts at play here is probability neglect. Essentially, this is where we drastically overestimate our own personal risk in a situation. And one of the most famous examples of probability neglect asked people how much they would pay to avoid an electric shock, something unpleasant that no one wants to experience. And the average person said they would pay $10 to avoid a 99% chance of a painful electric shock. As a side note, perhaps I'm a bit more pain averse, as $10 seems low to me, but maybe I'm just overestimating the amount of pain that I would feel from a shock of any kind. So anyway, to avoid the 99% chance of electric shock, people would pay $10. To avoid a 1% chance of the same shock, they would pay $7. You see the problem here? The amount someone is willing to pay to completely mitigate their risk is way out of proportion to what they will pay for the 99% scenario. We humans also have a zero risk bias. We would rather eliminate all risk when we can. So someone would maybe pay $7 to avoid the 1% chance of shock instead of paying $3 to reduce the 99% chance to a 25% chance or even 10%. Complete certainty feels good to our brains. We want to know what's going to happen and eliminate all our risk when we can. Why would you pay so much more to reduce 1% chance of the shock? That 1% is the same 1% if you're going from 99 to 98% or from 1% to 0, but it feels so much more impactful when it's the last 1%. Why wouldn't you pay to get rid of 50% of the chance of shock, even way more than what you would pay just for 1%? It's because our brains have these issues with probabilities and we don't like to take on any sort of risk. And when something is unknown, we would want to completely eliminate any risk whenever we can. And our brains are constantly looking for those opportunities. So our inability to properly understand probabilities and aversion to risk and need for control and a penchant for the status quo all combine in the worst possible way when we are confronted with an unknown, highly contagious disease. Panic sets in easier than we want to think, and everyone does what they can to control something, anything, to feel like they're protecting themselves and their families. We then combine this with a couple more biases that make matters even worse: availability and herding. Episodes 15 and 19, both linked for you in the show notes at thebrainybusiness.com/91. Availability bias is when our brains believe what we hear most often to be true, more than something we haven't heard about a lot. And even when we know on a conscious level that something is wrong, it can be very hard to change this automatic processing reaction in the brain. The example I've given a lot on availability bias is in the form of a question. When are people most likely to buy flood insurance? That's right, after a flood, when they're least likely to need it. And once enough time has passed, they get rid of it just in time for the next flood to come around. Some other examples would be that when asked which has more crime-related deaths, Detroit or Michigan, most people say Detroit, even though Detroit is a city in Michigan, so there have to be more in Michigan since there are so many other places adding on to that Detroit number. But we don't hear about crimes in Michigan. They're talked about happening in Detroit. And apologize to anyone from Detroit listening. I'm not singling you out. This is the study that was done. Getting to our current situation with coronavirus, as of this recording, there have been 118,074 cases of coronavirus worldwide, resulting in 4,204 deaths, and 64,716 people have recovered. We're also finding out every day people are testing positive but are asymptomatic, so the ratios could be vastly different in the number of total people that have coronavirus. We just don't know. And as a quick caveat before I go any further, I want to make sure everyone knows that I know we're talking about real humans. Each of these numbers represents a person, a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, a friend. I do not take this lightly as I share the details throughout the episode. I'm sharing facts as facts to help pull emotion out of the conversation as our subconscious brains run on emotion. And that is where a lot of the fear and panic comes from in an epidemic or pandemic or unknown threat of any kind. If there is a lack of emotion that you're feeling that it seems like should be there, please do note that I've intentionally removed that as much as possible from the conversation so that, again, we're talking about this conscious cognitive space and it is not out of a lack of sympathy or empathy for everyone who's impacted at this time. So, as a reminder, coronavirus, as of March 10th, 2020, has about 118,000 cases and 4,200 deaths worldwide. These numbers are pulled from a really simple and useful website created by actually a 17-year-old boy in Mercer Island, which is the greater Seattle area. And he gathers data from all government websites and other sources to have up-to-the-minute accurate information, just very simple. It doesn't have a lot of fluff. It's just the numbers broken down by country and by then state and different areas in China, things like that. It's to help everyone see what's happening around the world without all the hype. There's a link for that in the show notes if you want to check that out. So we now know those numbers for coronavirus. But let's talk about something else. According to an article by ABC News, on February 21st, in the 2019-2020 flu season, just in the United States, 280,000 people have been hospitalized, and 16,000 of those have died already from the flu this year, which is 4 times the number that have been impacted and actually passed away from coronavirus. Around the world, there are 3 to 5 million serious cases of the flu each year, and somewhere between 290,000 and 650,000 deaths. If we take an average of the flu deaths each year, we would be at 470,000 around the world. That means there are almost 4 times as many deaths from the flu than the total diagnoses of coronavirus. There are 112 times as many deaths from the flu every year than there have been so far from coronavirus, and hopefully that number stays low. Stopping the spread is important. We don't want to needlessly spread another virus around when we don't have to, but why don't we hear more about these flu-related deaths every year? Why don't we talk about them? And when we do hear the numbers, why don't they scare us as much as coronavirus? It's because we've all had the flu. We probably get it once a year, or someone we know does. It's a known entity. Everyone we know has had it at least once, so our availability bias says flu's annoying, but it isn't that big of a deal. We decline flu shots and apparently aren't great at properly washing our hands and continue to travel and meet people and go to conferences and get on planes when it's just the flu. But the flu is actually really serious. And maybe you noticed in all the recommendations for the best way to not spread coronavirus, basically wash your hands for 20 seconds every time you cough, sneeze, use the bathroom, touch something dirty like a doorknob, before eating, after shaking hands with people. These are the exact same recommendations to stop the spread of influenza. If we all reacted this much to stop the spread of the flu each year, would a lot less people get infected and therefore have less getting seriously ill and hospitalized or worse? Probably. So why do we not react in the same way during flu season as we are during the coronavirus outbreak? And why is it so hard to change our behaviors? First, I'm going to finish up about availability bias and why we react differently during coronavirus than during flu. And then I'll get into the difficulty involved in behavioral change. So availability bias is a huge culprit for the public reaction to COVID-19. All the media talks about and focuses on with coronavirus is how fast it's spreading, how many more people are infected or dying, who declared a state of emergency, what was shut down, how people are panicking, the horrors of the stock market, and everything negative going on. We don't see nearly as many interviews with people who have recovered or talk about positives as they emerge. The focus, because of fear and natural brain biases, is on the scary stuff. So that's all we see. We can't help but focus on the negatives almost exclusively. And we have this fear of getting it. Most of us don't know anyone who has ever had it. And so it's scary because what if we are the ones that are going to have a problem, that we're going to be in that 1%? We want to mitigate all of that risk in this unknown space. With the flu, barely anyone talks about the big negatives. And even when there's a story of a local person who dies from the flu, our brains naturally write it off as a fluke because we know that in general, people get the flu and are fine. That isn't necessarily true, but experience overshadows reality. The unknown variables of coronavirus are what make it really scary to the brain and are a big reason why we can't think straight about it. I do want to clarify, it is not my recommendation to stop worrying about coronavirus. For one thing, it can't be done. We will all worry on some level until there's a treatment and vaccine and cases start to go down. It's human nature. Your biological response is to be scared, and that's okay. You will worry about it in many ways, but it's also important to take the newfound perspective and think about what habits should be maintained. I think the world has learned that we don't generally disinfect our hands well enough or often enough to fight viruses properly. Now that we all know you should wash your hands for 20 seconds and we've sung happy birthday in our head so many times we might be going a little nutty, the natural inclination of the brain will be to relax on those measures once the scare goes away. When cases start to reduce and it looks like we're out of the COVID woods, we need to maintain these new habits. There are other viruses out there which have proven to be even more deadly than coronavirus, even the simple flu and common cold. And these better habits can help keep us all healthier and happier into the future. Which leads to the next point. Why is it so difficult to change habits? First is because they're habits, so we're used to them. They have subconscious rules and the brain is stuck in its ways. When you aren't consciously focused on the 11 steps of hand washing, yes, in case you hadn't heard that tidbit, there are 11 steps for properly washing hands according to the WHO. I've included a link to the poster which shows you how to do this properly in case you haven't seen it yet. Your brain has a process for hand washing. Maybe it has 4 or even 8 steps, and changing one would take conscious processing multiple times to ingrain it into your memory. Let's say something as simple as the order in which you put water or soap on your hands. I've always been a wet hands then apply soap person, but I know this is not what many people were taught. Others have been told that you put the soap first and then add water after you've covered your hands with the soap. I'm not only sharing this with you because the WHO poster has step 0, which feels like cheating, by the way, but we'll let it pass. So step 0 is wetting your hands with water and then you apply the soap. So if you've always done it the other way, you may constantly find yourself putting soap first, even though you don't want to and you were thinking, oh no, I wanted to do water first. So this begs the question, what other steps are you missing? 11 is a lot. Maybe you forgot the backs of your hands or under your nails. Even when you're trying to be super diligent, it's easy to miss 1 or 2. What about when the threat feels less imminent and things go back to normal? How many people will revert and miss 9 of the 11 steps? every behavior is much more complex than the simple wash your hands. As we can see, wash your hands has a dozen steps to it, not to mention all the other points where we might be spreading germs, handshakes, blowing noses, touching our own face. You don't even realize you do it because it's something your subconscious does without alerting your conscious brain. Saying stop it to yourself doesn't make you stop, even if you want to, because there are 10 other steps your subconscious is going through before actually touching your own face. And please don't take this as me saying it's not worth the effort to change. It absolutely is. We can all stand to do better in this area, but it isn't as simple as we want it to be. And if we believe that it is or should be simple, it will be even harder to change. It does take diligence at the beginning and a continued effort to maintain a change like all 11 steps of washing your hands. I also want to remind you that your conscious processing can only do so much work at one time. When you take steps out of subconscious habit and force them into your conscious actions, that means something else you would have been thinking about more and paying conscious attention to needs to be relegated for the time being. That means the subconscious will jump to all its conclusions and apply habits in all those other areas. So trying to be more consciously cognizant and focused on washing your hands as diligently as you're supposed to be doing every single time will mean that you're more likely to be a victim to loss aversion, scarcity mindset, herding, probability neglect, and all those other biases running rampant right now. You can't stop the initial response to stimuli. That's ingrained in you. What you can do is stop and ask yourself a question when you find yourself reaching to buy a lifetime supply of toilet paper just in case. Is this rational? Do I need this? Why do I feel the need to buy so much? Taking a moment to breathe and focus can help determine if your action is warranted or unnecessary. Getting a 12-ounce container of hand sanitizer to keep your hands clean when you're away from a sink is reasonable. Buying 10 gallons of hand sanitizer from Amazon and then running to the store to get another 5 before the others arrive tomorrow, maybe that's a bit excessive. And as one of my new favorite memes on this has shared, it's important to remember that in order to prevent the spread of virus germs, we all need to wash and sanitize our hands regularly. If you bought all the hand sanitizer in your region, no one else can keep their hands clean. Ugh. One other problem we have when it comes to changing behavior is our brain's natural risk thermostat. Essentially, when we do one thing well, we feel justified slacking on something else. Buying and wearing face masks, which authorities have said over and over again will not help keep you from contracting the virus. So if you're healthy, there's no reason to buy them. And in actuality, you're making it so those who do need them, people with the virus and those working or living in very close proximity to them, can't get them, meaning they're more likely to contract and spread the disease further. So if you buy face masks and feel you've taken measures to super protect yourself, your brain ticks a sort of mental checklist saying you took an action. Yay, you, which means it then feels justified in being less diligent when washing your hands. Or if you bought hand sanitizer and use it a few more times a day, maybe you feel less inclined to wash your hands with all 11 steps. Or you aren't as worried about washing hands since you've stopped shaking hands with people and conveniently forgot that you're touching doorknobs, your cell phone, and then eating some chips and touching your face before washing your hands again. If we can all only do one thing really well as we look to fight the spread of viruses, because that one thing has a bunch of hidden steps, we should be focusing on the one thing that's proven to be most effective. In this case, you probably already know it's hand washing. If you can do the other stuff too, great, but focus on less stuff to help stop the spread of disease. Another thing I want to mention before wrapping up the episode is this mindset and fear about being a social pariah. No one wants to be diagnosed with coronavirus. We don't want to be sick at all, but this type of diagnosis is scary, and it's easier to ostrich than to go to the doctor and get tested. People may say, I have a little fever, but it's not corona. I'm sure of it. I don't need to go to the doctor. I'll just stay home for the weekend and I'm sure I'll be better. You start to worry if everyone finds out that I have it, they may not want to be friends with me anymore. I could be an outcast. What would it mean? Would they look at me differently or judge me? I'm sure that's not what it is, and I'll go to the doctor if it gets really bad. But for now, I'll wait and watch and load up on cold medicine. This mentality is a combination of herding and ostrich or head in the sand type of response. It's a ridiculous little quirk that our brains think what we don't know or see can't hurt us when we know that's just absolutely not true. Even if you don't know you have cancer, it's still causing damage to your body. Knowing is necessary to move forward, but the brain wants to stay in this limbo where it feels safe for as long as possible. Being quarantined for 2 weeks or more sounds awful. It would be super boring and scary. Having the simple flu or a cold is more accepted, and so I'll rationalize that's all I have because it's less scary. And if you have the regular run-of-the-mill flu, you're less likely to be ostracized. You're safe, protected, one of the many in the herd that gets the flu, instead of one of the few people everyone is scared to be around. No one I know has it, so I must not have it. I couldn't have it. But if everyone thinks this way and no one self-quarantines or gets tested when they show symptoms, it will persist and more people will get sick. Again, this is your brain's natural reaction to avoid risk and things that seem scary and stay safe in the herd. But if you have symptoms or you're around someone who does, it's best to get tested. Just do it, whether you know it or not. You're still impacted if you have it. It's easier said than done, I know, but that's why we're talking about it. I'm telling you the reaction in your brain is normal. The desire to run to the store and buy all the toilet paper before all those other crazy people get it all and I'm stuck perpetuates a problem. This is also what we're seeing in the stock market and travel bans and remote working and conferences being canceled. The general rule of herding is that our brains believe it's better to be conventionally wrong than unconventionally right. And no one wants to be the company or conference or person who didn't act when they could have, and then something happens. It feels easier to go the safe route, have an abundance of caution, which is a phrase that's gained popularity recently, and shut down just in case. Again, I get why companies are leaning on the safe side. You want and need to protect your people. But if we all go to the utmost extreme versions and no one travels and there are no conferences and no one goes out to dinner and no one goes to stores or uses Uber, we create a vicious cycle that can seriously tank the economy and create a much bigger problem. One person who is too abundant with their caution can cause a chain reaction the herd has to adhere to, even if they don't want to, for fear of public scrutiny. As an example, I'm going to talk about an airline. We know the travel industry is drastically impacted by coronavirus. There are a lot less people flying right now because companies are reducing business travel, and some have banned their employees from flying, which is a big hit to the economy as well. Most of the airlines and hotels have started introducing very low fares to encourage travel with increased cancellation options. Some are being forced to cut flights, change schedules, and ground planes because there isn't enough demand to justify all the air traffic they usually would have, and it's just more economical to save the fuel. What if one airline decided that out of their abundance of caution, they were going to ground their entire fleet for a month, or even 2 weeks or 2 days? This decision could have been made by one way too cautious person who's making a choice far beyond what is needed. But once it's done and announced, what would happen then? If this airline grounded their fleet, all the airlines would have to wonder, do we need to do that too? What if we don't and someone gets sick? Or there's a spread that's linked back to us that could have been prevented and we're the only ones who kept flying. We better get on top of this and follow suit before we're on the wrong end of this equation. Then a second and third and 10th airline grounds their planes, and it's a snowball that can't be easily reversed. No planes means no travelers, which means no Ubers and hotels and restaurants shut their doors and entire cities are effectively shut down. Stock market prices decline further because no one's going to be generating revenue this quarter, and people panic and pull their money and they cancel other flights, and then more people get scared and pull their money and tell their moms and friends they need to get out immediately too. One person making a rash and extreme decision can cause a huge chain reaction that is difficult to stop. One media outlet posting only sensationalized negative information and looking for the worst angles of things that haven't actually happened can cause that same panic. One rumor can cause the entire continent of Australia to essentially run out of toilet paper. Bringing it full circle, when we feel a lack of control, of uncertainty, like we do when a novel virus is spreading around the world, we get scared. And the brain looks for something to do and control, something to feel like it's taking any positive action to protect itself, even if it isn't rational, even if it's causing a bigger problem. Time discounting kicks in and we control what we can today when faced with mortality and a question of tomorrow. Fear, rational or otherwise, is powerful, and it can undo an entire economy quickly. I saw a great analogy in a recent article I read on all of this, which talked about how an economy is like a tower built out of Lego. It takes a long time to build, but it's still fragile, and one wrong move can cause the entire thing to shatter. Even though you've built the tower before, it'll still take a long time to rebuild. We need to all do our part to not smash our global Lego tower just because our subconscious is scared of the unknown. Let's all be thoughtful and aware of these biases and do our part to consciously stop the spread of disease and false stories about it so we can have a quicker recovery period. One last note on your own business and what you can be thinking about in the age of coronavirus. This is an opportunity to revisit the way you've always done things. If your salespeople have said they can only do deals in person and are constantly traveling, but now are forced to work remotely, what can you offer in a more virtual space instead of completely halting progress? What services can you offer your clients that you never thought about or that they weren't previously ready for? A friend of mine named Nikki Ramirez owns a company called HR Answers. They create policies and employee manuals and all sorts of other HR-related things for small businesses. We were talking on a weekly mastermind recently about what we all might offer our clients to be of best service to them in the current space. And there was talk about remote working policies for companies that don't have them. My friend already has a template and best practices for this type of policy, and there are a lot of people scrambling to put them together for their company, and they're bound to forget or miss important pieces if they do it alone and too fast. If they could buy a template that cut their work in half or more, how great would that be? It's a huge benefit to clients and a value add that she could quickly turn around to showcase her services. It's a win-win. And there's a link to her website, HR Answers, if you want to check it out. Things are not the same as they were even 3 months ago. We're in a new era that will hopefully be short, but smart businesses will adapt and adjust during and after the scares behind us. What can you be doing today while people aren't traveling and the status quo is already disrupted to look at your offering and find opportunities to make your company better, stronger, more diversified, more communicative? The opportunities are there. It's up to each of us to find them. Maybe you can do a little 20-second brainstorming session with yourself each time you wash your hands. Make that productive time. There's a free worksheet for you in the show notes at thebrainybusiness.com/91 with some simple prompts to help you think differently about your business in this age of coronavirus. A brain shift doesn't come easily, but now is a great time to take a deep look into your business and see if there are ways to shake up the way you've always done things and come out stronger on the other side. As a bonus, employees need a project, a distraction in this time of uncertainty to keep them focused on something they can control. Considering how to reallocate budget or what products or services you could shift to be of better service during the outbreak can give them something productive and fulfilling to work on, to feel like they're doing something of value that also moves your business forward. Again, that simple worksheet is available for you free to help prompt you through the process at thebrainybusiness.com/91, along with all the other links for resources listed in this episode. And there are a lot this week. One of those that I don't believe I mentioned yet is a link to Habit Weekly and last week's episode where I interviewed Samuel Salzer. He had a great edition last week with an entire section dedicated to behavioral science content around coronavirus, and several of those were used as sources for this episode. If you haven't subscribed to Habit Weekly yet, there's a link for you to do so in the show notes. It was my goal in this episode to show a little different side than what you may be hearing out in the news or via a quick Google search. I want everyone to learn a little about themselves and how they and everyone else is essentially programmed to react during an outbreak, epidemic, pandemic, whatever you want to call it. Hopefully you learn something, and it will help bring a little peace of mind now and into the future. If you know someone who may find the insights from this episode on coronavirus interesting, would you share it with them? You can copy the link from the app you're listening to or send them to that same page, thebrainybusiness.com/91, and they can listen there and get all of the details. And hopefully we can all reduce the panic a little bit by understanding our brains even more. Of course, all the positive thoughts and good vibes are being sent out from the Brainy Business to everyone who's been impacted by coronavirus, all the families and friends. You're in our hearts, and hopefully we'll be on the other side of this very soon. And just like that, episode 91 on pandemics, specifically coronavirus, is done. Next week, on episode 92, it's a Behavioral Economics Foundations episode on fundamental attribution error. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.